video talks you through the steps related to data processing for labN. I'll show you how to import a text file, how to manipulate the data related to that text file, ultimately make some graphs and process at least one of the graphs. I'll assume that you have exported your data to a USB memory stick, that you've inserted the memory stick into a computer and you're ready to import the data into Excel. Starting from your Excel file, I'm going to go to File, Open. You would be browsing to find the USB memory stick. I'm going to browse to look in a particular folder where I have my data stored. Now initially this will say all Excel files. What you'll need to show is all files so we can find the text file. Now the text file that I'm interested in is called Kinetic 1. I'll open this. I'll click Finish right to the end, and it'll take that text data and put it into columns in the Excel file. I can see that I've got time in seconds, I have percent transmittance and absorbance. We're not going to need the percent transmittance data, and so I'm going to click into this column and I will delete the column. The next step is to make a series of calculated columns. It'll be helpful to have a couple of titles at the top of each column so you can see what you're calculating. I've already done this in another file, and to speed things up, I'm going to go to that right away. So here we have, once again, time in seconds, absorbance, and then I've made 3 column titles here: concentration in molar, ln of concentration, and 1 over concentration with the units of molar to the -1. First of all, let's make our calculated concentration column. The idea here is that we want to convert absorbance to concentration. We need to use the molar absorptivity of the crystal violet. So to make this calculated column, I will put equals, and I'm going to select the 0.2 absorbance and then divide by 77,000, which is the molar absorptivity of our crystal violet. Click Enter, and there's the value that I want. I'm now going to take my crosshair pointer and drag down so that these other calculations will be done. I will point out that I have quite a bit of less data than what you will see when you're actually doing these calculations, but I chose to have a smaller amount of data so that we can see a little more easily what's involved. The next thing is to make the ln of concentration column. So once again, equals, and then I'm going to start typing in LN, and then put in brackets, and be careful, what you want to put in brackets is not the absorbance, but rather the concentration. Close the brackets, click Enter, and there's my ln of concentration. Once again, take the cross-haired pointer, pull down, and these calculations are done. Finally, 1 over the concentration. To do this calculation, it's once again equals, and then 1 /, and then make sure you select concentration, and then I click Enter, and there we go. Using my cross-haired pointer, pull down, and now all these calculations are done. I'm not worrying about sig figs in preparing these graphs. Ultimately, you'll need to consider the significant figures when you're calculating your rate constant K values. In so doing, you should consider what sort of absorbance values you have been using and the time values, and that will essentially dictate how many sig figs that you will be permitted. Let us make our 3 different graphs. This will be concentration as a function of time, ln of concentration as a function of time, and 1 over concentration as a function of time. I'll begin by selecting the time value here, then holding down the control button. Select the concentration. I'll then go to Insert. I'm going to insert a scatter plot and one that does not involve joining the lines. So there's my first chart, and I'll stick it up here. In my next chart, I once again will select the time value, holding down the control button, and ln of concentration. I will then go back to Insert, Scatter Plot, and the same sort of scatter plot without connecting the lines. I'll put this plot over here. I'll repeat the process one more time. Time in seconds, holding down the control button, and 1 over concentration, Insert, Scatter Plot. Yes, you will need to make 3 graphs, and one of the reasons why you're making the 3 graphs is to determine the order of the reaction with respect to the crystal violet. The idea is you're trying to see which of these three plots gives you a straight line. Clearly it's the third plot, and this relates to the 1 over concentration as a function of time. This tells us that in this particular case, the data is second order with respect to crystal violet. You will need to see what your particular data gives you for your particular experiment. Okay, so I'm using this just as an example. Now you'll need to format all three of your graphs so that you can include that in your report. I'll go through the formatting of the third graph as an example, just to remind you about what's involved. So the first thing I'm going to do is remove this chart title at the top, because in making our graphs we do not want to have the chart title at the top. Rather, we like to have a figure title at the bottom of the graph, and we usually will write that once we've cut and paste our graph into Word. The next thing we'll need to do is remove the grid lines. Now, one of the things that I'll remind you about in terms of working in Excel is there are many different ways of formatting a graph. I'm showing you one way. Perhaps you have other ways that you want to do this. And of course, there are different orders as well. So I'm going to proceed with removing the grid lines. So I double click on the grid line, and it gives me a panel here. And then I select no line. I'm going to double click now on these vertical grid lines, and once again no line. And then finally, while I'm at it, I'm going to remember to click on the outer border line and click no line. And while it may be hard to see it here in Excel, this has removed the border. You'll see it more clearly when you cut and paste the graph into Word. I'm going to put my title axes, so coming over here, and I find that it's easiest to actually come up to the design and add a chart element and then the axes title. And so let's aim first of all for the primary vertical. So this is going to be 1 over the concentration of the crystal violet. So I'm selecting this area in here, 1 / I'm going to use the square brackets for the concentration, crystal violet represented as CV. I've got a plus here, close brackets. Now I can set the plus to be a superscript, so I'm just going to select the plus value and then come on over here to Home and Font and set this as superscript. I'll proceed forward to collect past the square bracket, and now I'm going to put round brackets and my unit. So that would be molar to the -1. Finish that, and if I can, I'm going to try to select just the -1 and set this as superscript. So the font button and superscript. Okay, so that formatting has been done. If you are having trouble doing this formatting here in Excel, once you've cut and paste the graph into Word, you can also do the formatting there. And certainly I believe that this is a necessity when you're working with a Mac. The next thing I'm going to do is put my title axes for my x-axis. So back to the design, add chart element, axes title, primary horizontal. In this case, it's time in seconds. Remember, the abbreviation for seconds is just S. So I'll need to put my tick marks. I'm first of all going to select the x-axis, and then coming over here to this axis option and tick marks, and select the major, and I'll put my ticks outside of the box. I'm going to select the y-axis data, coming over to the options, tick marks, major tick marks outside of the box. There we go. The last thing I need to do is to fit a trend line to this data. Certainly you'll want to do that for any data that's linear. It's not really necessary to do it for these other graphs because we can see that clearly they're not linear and there's no information we want to take from these graphs. So selecting the lines, I'm now going to right click. I'm going to add a trend line, linear trend line, and I'll want to display the equation on the chart. And there we have it. This equation allows us to determine the slope of the line. Because this is a plot of 1 over concentration of crystal violet as a function of time, the slope of the line represents the K value which will be a positive value with the units of molar to the -1, seconds to the -1. I hope that you have found this video to be helpful to see how to import the data and ultimately how to produce the graphs and format one of the graphs.